So let's talk about Kenya. Beautiful country, right? We're talking savannas, incredible wildlife, vibrant cities like Nairobi. It's a place of immense culture and history. But sometimes, even in the most beautiful places, the darkest stories can unfold. And that's what happened in a remote corner of the country, in a place called Shakahola Forest. Now, Shakahola isn't a famous national park you see on a postcard. It's a quiet, sprawling, semi-arid patch of land in Kilifi County, near the coast. It's the kind of place where people go to get away from it all, to find peace. But in 2023, this quiet forest became the center of a story so grim, so unbelievable, it sent shockwaves not just across Kenya, but around the entire world. Imagine this, a thick, thorny bushland stretching for 800 acres. That's huge. It's a place where you could easily get lost, a place where secrets could be buried deep. This wasn't just any forest, it became a graveyard. The story that emerged from Shakahola wasn't about a natural disaster or a war. No, this was something else entirely. About a so-called man of God who allegedly led his followers down a path not to heaven, but to a slow, agonizing death. It's a story that forces you to ask some really tough questions about belief, vulnerability, and the terrifying power of manipulation. The Shakahola incident, as it's now known, is a tragedy of mass scale. We're talking about hundreds of people, including innocent children, who lost their lives in the most horrific way imaginable. They weren't attacked. They were convinced to give up their own lives. They were told that by starving themselves, they would be the first to meet Jesus. Think about that for a second. The promise of salvation was used as a lure to lead people to their deaths. This quiet forest, this supposed sanctuary, was turned into a scene of unimaginable horror, a place where families willingly went to die, all based on the words of one man. This whole tragedy pulls the curtain back on the dark side of unchecked religious influence. In many parts of the world, faith is a source of strength, of community, of hope. But what happens when that faith is hijacked? What happens when a charismatic leader tells you that the path to eternal life requires you to leave this one behind right now by refusing food and water? The Shakahola horror story is a chilling, real-world example. It's a story that starts with a seemingly humble preacher. So, who's the guy at the center of this whole nightmare? His name is Paul Nthenge Mackenzie. Before he was an infamous cult leader, he was a taxi driver in Nairobi. Just a regular guy, hustling to make a living. But somewhere along the line, he decided driving taxis wasn't his calling. He felt a different calling, a religious one. So he started the Good News International Ministries in 2003. At first, it seemed like just another evangelical church popping up all over Kenya. He had a TV channel, he preached fiery sermons, he gained a following. People were drawn to his charisma and his seemingly straightforward message. But Mackenzie's message started getting weird. Really weird. He didn't just preach about loving your neighbor. He began preaching against what he called the evils of the world. You might think he meant greed or corruption. Nope. For Mackenzie, the evils were education, modern medicine, using money. He told followers to pull their children out of school because education was satanic. He told them not to go to hospitals or get vaccinated. Jesus was the only healer. He told them to unplug from society completely. He built a wall between his followers and the rest of the world, one strange rule at a time. This is where it gets really dark. His ultimate teaching, the end of the world was near. He convinced followers the apocalypse was coming and they had to prepare. But preparation meant starving themselves to death. He sold it as a holy fast, a way to meet Jesus before the end. He laid out a gruesome timeline. First the children would die, then the women, finally the men. He claimed he would be the last to go. He created a theology centered on self-destruction. He moved his operation from the city to the isolation of Shakahola Forest. He called it his holy land. People sold their homes, quit their jobs, and walked into the wilderness with their families. They handed over all their possessions, believing they were investing in salvation. Mackenzie became a gatekeeper. The only way through the gate was to leave everything, including your life, behind. It was a perfect trap in the middle of nowhere. So you have this doomsday cult, starving itself out in the middle of a remote forest. How does a story like that even get out? You'd think someone would notice hundreds of people just vanishing. Well, someone did. The first red flag wasn't a massive police raid or a government investigation. It was a single man, husband, father, desperately trying to save his family. In March 2023, a man named Hussein Khalid walked into a police station. He was frantic. He told the police his wife and daughter had gone into Shakahola forest to join Mackenzie's cult, and he was terrified they were being starved to death. The police listened, but the wheels of justice can turn slowly. Before they could mount a major operation, another tip came in, this time from a human rights group. They had reports of a weird religion in the forest and people dying from starvation. The whispers were getting louder. The story took a dramatic turn when the police, acting on these tips, finally went into the forest in mid-April. They weren't prepared for what they were about to find. They initially went in looking for the missing people reported by Khalid and others. Their first discovery was horrifying. They found 15 emaciated people barely clinging to life. 4 of them died before they could even reach the hospital. This initial rescue was just the tip of the iceberg. The survivors told the police a story that was hard to comprehend. They spoke of a fast ordered by Mackenzie, a fast to the death, to meet Jesus. And they said there were others, many others, still in the forest. Some were starving, and some were already buried. It was at this point that the authorities knew this wasn't just a case of a few missing persons. This was a mass casualty event orchestrated by a cult leader. The scale of the tragedy was only just beginning to reveal itself. The forest, once a symbol of isolation, was about to become a crime scene like no other. The news started to break, first as a local story, then quickly exploding into a national and international crisis. The initial reports were confusing. Was this a mass suicide? A mass murder? The survivors were too weak and traumatized to give clear accounts. All they knew was that Baba, their name for Mackenzie, had told them the time had come. The discovery of those first 15 starving people was the thread that, when pulled, unraveled the entire horrific tapestry of the Good News International Ministries and exposed the full, devastating truth hidden deep within Shakahola Forest. The world was about to learn Mackenzie's name. Once the police understood the gravity of the situation, a massive search and rescue operation began. But what started as a rescue mission quickly turned into an excavation. Investigators, forensic teams, human rights workers fanned out across the 800-acre forest. The true scale of the horror became sickeningly clear. They didn't just find people hiding, people starving, they started finding graves. Not 1 or 2, but dozens. Graves scattered throughout the bush, shallow pits in the sandy soil. Some held a single body, others were mass graves, entire families' children buried alongside their parents. The scene was apocalyptic. Makeshift settlements in small clearings, mud huts, tents now eerily silent. Rescuers found people days from death, some hours from death. Skeletal survivors wasted by starvation, too weak to speak. Some refused to be rescued, believing salvation was a trick. Paramedics trying to give someone an IV drip, person fighting them off. The psychological hold Mackenzie had on them was that powerful. Day after day, the death toll climbed. Simple wooden crosses, piles of sticks marking graves. Forensic teams in white suits exhuming remains under the hot sun. Slow, painstaking, emotionally draining work. Identifying victims, determining cause of death. Overwhelmingly starvation, documenting everything. The forest floor itself became evidence. Numbers rose, dozens, over 100, 200, 300, a grim tally that shocked the country each evening on the news. Beyond bodies, chilling clues emerged. Diaries with heartbreaking entries, children's clothes found near graves, toys left beside burial sites. Some reports suggested victims were not just starved but suffocated or bludgeoned. The Shakahola forest became a symbol of unimaginable cruelty. The search for bodies continues even today, a grim reminder that the full story may never be completely known. As the body count in Shakahola climbed, the public's anger turned squarely on one man, Paul Mackenzie. He had been arrested back in April 2023, found in the forest along with some of his enforcers. When he first appeared in court, he looked gaunt himself, claiming he had also been fasting. The initial charges were just the beginning of a long and complex legal battle. Terrorism, murder, manslaughter, torture, and cruelty to children. The legal proceedings have been a spectacle. In court, Mackenzie has denied everything. He claims he closed his church back in 2019 and has had no control over what people did in Shakahola. He presents himself as a victim, just another persecuted man of God. But the prosecution paints a very different picture. Testimony from survivors, physical evidence from the forest, Mackenzie's own sermons, which were recorded and broadcast. They argue that he was the mastermind, the CEO of a death cult, who meticulously planned and orchestrated the starvation of his followers. allegedly with the help of a gang of enforcers who made sure no one broke the fast or tried to escape. This case has posed a huge challenge for the Kenyan legal system. How do you prosecute a crime like this? The charges of terrorism are particularly interesting. The prosecution argues that by using religious dogma to cause mass death and create widespread fear, Mackenzie's actions fit the definition of terrorism. It's a novel approach, framing religious extremism as a terrorist act. Hundreds of victims, a massive crime scene, complex psychological elements. The state has had to conduct DNA tests on hundreds of bodies to identify them, a process that takes a very long time and has been agony for the families waiting for answers. The public reaction has been one of pure outrage and disbelief. Kenyans have followed every twist and turn of the court case, demanding justice for the victims. There's also been a lot of criticism aimed at the government and local authorities. How could this happen? There were warning signs about Mackenzie for years. He'd been arrested before for his extreme teachings but was always released. People are asking why he wasn't stopped sooner. The trial of Paul Mackenzie is more than just a trial of one man. It's become a trial of the systems that are supposed to protect citizens from exactly this kind of predatory figure. The nation is watching, waiting for accountability. While the legal drama unfolds, the most powerful stories from Shakahola come from the people who lived through it. The survivors' accounts are a chilling window into the cult's inner workings and the absolute control Mackenzie wielded. They paint a picture of a community completely cut off from reality. Once inside the forest, followers were forbidden from communicating with the outside world. Their phones were taken away. They were told that their families who weren't in the cult were agents of Satan. This isolation was key. It made Mackenzie's voice the only one they heard, the only truth they knew. Survivors describe a highly organized and brutal system. The fast was not optional. Enforcers were appointed, an internal police force. They patrolled the settlements. Their job? Enforce the starvation rules. Those caught secretly drinking or seeking food were beaten. Children were reportedly the first to be starved. If they cried for food, some were taken from their parents and silenced. It was a system built on fear. One survivor, a man who escaped after his wife and children had already died, described the psychological torment. At first there was spiritual euphoria. People believed they were chosen, doing something holy. Then hunger set in, deaths began, and doubt crept in for some. They were trapped. Deep in the forest, weak and constantly watched, escaping was nearly impossible. Hope of meeting Jesus gave way to the grim reality of a death camp. The stories are filled with heartbreaking loss. A woman recounted bringing 5 children into the forest. She watched them die, one by one. She survived because she was rescued in time. Guilt and trauma are immense. Many were active participants under the influence of a trusted spiritual guide. These testimonies are crucial. They transform victims from statistics into real people, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, and expose the true human cost. The Shakahola massacre has left a deep and painful scar on the soul of Kenya. It's a national trauma. For months, the news was dominated by images of exhumations. For months, the news was dominated by stories of grieving families. People from across the country traveled to Kilifi, desperately searching for missing relatives, hoping to find them alive, often only getting the devastating news that their DNA matched bodies recovered from the forest. The sheer number of unidentified bodies created a logistical and emotional nightmare for the government, a state of perpetual limbo for families who still don't know the fate of their loved ones. The tragedy forced a harsh spotlight on regulation of religious organizations in Kenya. Kenya has a long history of religious freedom, but Shakahola showed the dangerous side of that freedom when unchecked. For years, Kenya has grappled with self-proclaimed prophets and cult-like churches that prey on the poor and vulnerable. There were earlier incidents, like the Kanungu cult massacre in Uganda in 2000. The warning signs were there, but little was done to strengthen oversight. Now there's a loud public cry for the government to vet religious leaders and shut down extremist groups. This ordeal is a terrifying lesson in the power of cults and manipulation. Cult leaders like Mackenzie are masters of psychological control. They start by isolating their followers, cutting them off from friends and family, cutting them off from outside information. Then they create an us versus them mentality. They demand absolute loyalty. They exploit followers financially. They exploit followers emotionally. Shakahola is extreme, but the tactics are classic. It's a wake-up call to be critical of charismatic leaders who demand total obedience. Ultimately, the lesson is one of caution and community. It's about asking questions, even about faith. If a religious leader tells you to abandon your family, if a leader tells you to harm yourself, if a leader tells you to cut yourself off from the world, these are massive red flags. Look out for each other. If someone is being pulled into a controlling group, speak up. Seek help from authorities or support groups. The tragedy happened in silence, in the isolation of a forest. Preventing it means breaking the silence and building communities of genuine care, not blind, destructive faith.